America's greatest cities were built on more than steel and sweat. Millions survived on recipes no history book mentions. From 1880 to 1920, as over 23 million immigrants crowded into dark tenements, 10 or more people to a room, survival meant transforming scraps, beans, and bread into fuel that powered 12-hour shifts on railroads and in steel mills. These weren't just meals, but lifelines. Italian grandmothers teaching by memory, neighbors sharing the last potato, children bargaining at bustling markets in broken English. The official story is all skyscrapers and factories, but the real backbone was plated at the supper table. If you've never looked into the kitchens behind America's rise, you have no idea what's missing, or how flavors of survival became the taste of a nation. Rosa Benedetto's kitchen, tucked behind a battered tenement door on Mulberry Street, ran like a silent engine. At dawn, she would set a dented pot on the shared stove, filling it with water, beans, and whatever pasta survived the week. The recipe wasn't written. Her hands measured by memory, her eyes judged the beans' doneness. In those cramped rooms, a single meal had to stretch across 3 generations, borders, and sometimes a neighbor's hungry child. The science of survival played out in every bowl. Pasta e fagioli, a dish from Calabria, paired wheat and beans to form a complete protein, amino acids working in tandem, not just tradition but chemistry. On the rail lines and scaffolds, men burned through 3,000 calories a day. Rosa's soup delivered slow-release energy, complex carbs for the long haul, protein for muscle, a hint of olive oil for the day's last push. Polenta, too, made the rounds on battered wooden boards. Cornmeal simmered low and slow, then poured out in a golden sheet, cut and shared with a wedge of cheese or a spoonful of last summer's tomato sauce. For railroad crews in Chicago or tunnel diggers under the East River, this was fuel, dense, portable, and cheap. A slab of polenta could be wrapped in a cloth and eaten cold at noon. The taste of home layered over the grit of limestone dust. Minestrone simmered all afternoon, thick with cabbage, potatoes, and the week's odds and ends. It was more than a soup. It was a ledger of what the neighborhood had to give. One family's carrot, another's heel of bread, all surrendered to the pot. In kitchens like Rosa's, calories weren't just counted. They were bartered, borrowed, and repaid in kind. These meals did more than fill stomachs. They powered the hands that laid bricks, swung hammers, and carried steel up the skeletons of new cities. The recipes, passed from mother to daughter, became blueprints for survival, sustaining bodies, binding communities, and turning scraps into strength. In the hush between shifts over bowls of steaming soup, America's skyline found its foundation. In Pittsburgh's steel neighborhoods, the day began in the basement kitchens of St. Stanislaus. By 6, lines of flour-dusted aprons moved in rhythm, pinching dough into half-moons, pierogi, each one sealed with a practiced thumb. The Novak sisters worked shoulder to shoulder with neighbors, filling dough with potato cheese or sauerkraut, the steam rising as trays stacked high. These weren't just dumplings. They were paychecks stretched, calories counted, and Sunday solace for families who spent the week at the mills. Borscht simmered in battered pots, the beets staining broth a deep magenta. It was the taste of home and the medicine of winter, rich with cabbage and onion, sometimes a bone for flavor. The soup's heat cut through the chill left by the Monongahela, filling bellies and fighting off the scurvy that stalked tenement winters. In some kitchens, sauerkraut bubbled in stone crocks, its sharpness a safeguard when fresh produce vanished from the markets. Fermentation wasn't just tradition. It was survival science, preserving vitamins long after the harvest had faded. Cabbage rolls, golubki, appeared at every gathering, rolled tight by hands that never measured, only remembered. For a steelworker's family, a pot of cabbage rolls could last through the week, each one a pocket of rice, meat, and hope. When the whistle blew at Homestead or Carey Furnace, men carried pierogi wrapped in cloth, the dumplings still warm from the morning's assembly line. Lunch was eaten on the slag heap, each bite a reminder of the women who woke before dawn to feed them. In these neighborhoods, food was never solitary. Church basements became canteens, feeding entire blocks during strikes or funerals. Ingredients were borrowed, recipes shared, debts repaid in loaves of rye or jars of pickles. The kitchen was a union hall, a bank, a bridge to the old country. What began as a way to fill a pot became the blueprint for community, proof that survival, like dough, is always easier when kneaded together. Bagels, challah, and matzo ball soup. These were more than Sabbath staples or comfort foods. They were the backbone of a new kind of American enterprise. On Hester Street, David the baker rose before sunrise, his arms dusted in flour, shaping dough into rings with a practiced flick. The secret wasn't just in the dough, but in the water. Bagels were boiled first, then baked, forming that signature chewy crust. By 7, steam billowed from the basement ovens, and the scent carried up through the tenements, down to the push carts lining the curb. Bagels became currency in a city that ran on hustle. David joined Local 338, the Bagel Bakers Union, where each member guarded the boil and bake method like family silver. Union rules set everything: who mixed, who shaped, who boiled, who baked. The work was hard, but the pay was steady, enough to keep a family fed and maybe send a child to school. At dawn, pushcart vendors loaded up, selling bagels by the dozen to garment workers on their way to the factories. By noon, the same bread fueled dock hands and newsboys, crossing ethnic lines and city blocks. Challah, braided and golden, was more than bread. It was a ritual, a reminder of home and holy days, but also a ticket to economic survival. Jewish bakeries became neighborhood anchors, hiring cousins and neighbors, pooling resources to buy flour in bulk. On Fridays, lines snaked around the block, each loaf a small act of preservation, each sale a step toward independence. During the influenza outbreaks, matzo ball soup simmered in synagogue kitchens and settlement houses, ladled out to the sick and the grieving. The broth was medicine, the dumplings soft enough for the frail, a recipe passed down by memory, not measurement. These community soup kitchens became lifelines, run by volunteers who'd lost as much as those they served. What began as sustenance in cramped kitchens powered a leap to the sidewalk, then to storefronts, and eventually to citywide demand. The bagel went from Sabbath treat to breakfast staple. The bakery from family sideline to unionized business. In the hands of David and his peers, recipes became paychecks, and kitchens became the first rung on the ladder of American enterprise. Dumplings traveled farther than any one family ever could. In San Francisco's Chinatown, cooks rolled dough by the dozen, pinching pork and chive into neat crescents, each one a pocket of memory from Guangdong. The year-round rhythm of dumpling houses provided work for new arrivals and comfort for old-timers, their steam billowing out onto Grant Avenue, inviting the city in. By 1910, Chinese restaurants in New York had quadrupled, their menus adapting to local tastes but never losing the shape of home. Irish soda bread, once a farmhouse staple, found new life in Chicago's bakeries. Commercial baking soda, mass-produced by Church and Dwight since 1846, made it possible for Irish bakers to turn out loaves by the hundreds. By sunrise, the scent of warm bread drifted down Halsted Street, feeding laborers headed to the stockyards and newsboys running their first routes. Soda bread was sturdy, forgiving, and quick to make, an answer to crowded tenement ovens and the unpredictability of city life. Tortillas, pressed by hand in border kitchens, soon rolled off the first mechanical presses in El Paso. By the late 1920s, patents for tortilla machines allowed Mexican entrepreneurs to move from home kitchens to small factories. The city's earliest tortillerias became neighborhood gathering spots, selling stacks of fresh tortillas to families and restaurants alike. In Los Angeles, tortillas crossed the counter at lunch counters and cafes, fueling both railroad crews and schoolchildren. Scandinavian lefse, once rolled out on farmhouse tables in Minnesota, was sold at church fundraisers and, by the 1920s, in Midwestern bakeries. Greek lentil soup simmered in the back of diners, feeding line cooks and regulars side by side. Each of these staples, adapted, multiplied, and shared, became more than a taste of home. They became city food, feeding dock workers in Boston and seamstresses in Detroit, crossing lines of language and class. What began as survival became celebration, as immigrant recipes built not just families, but the very neighborhoods and businesses that would shape the American table. Between 1880 and 1920, more than 23 million immigrants arrived in America's cities, many settling in tenements where over 10 people often shared a single room and kitchen. Archival census records, union documents, and family photographs reveal how recipes like pasta e fagioli, pierogi, and tortillas fueled 12-hour shifts in steel mills, railroads, and garment factories. These dishes adapted to local ingredients and limited budgets, forging community bonds and, in time, launching new businesses. Yet many family stories remain undocumented, and some early recipe origins are still debated by historians. Today, these foods are woven into the fabric of American cuisine, sold everywhere from diners to food carts, as verified by city business directories and culinary archives. The evidence is clear. Immigrant family recipes didn't just feed workers. They built neighborhoods, industries, and lasting traditions that continue to shape American cities.